I feel like I've talked about horror movie sequels quite a bit here on the channel, but I'm going to talk about them a little more. We've covered the best sequels, the worst sequels, and even covered a few other angles on the topic, but not quite in this way. So join me today as I rank 5 horror sequels that are actually better than the original on this episode of Ranking Rumble. Welcome back to WWH. My name is Andrew Dreamer. Horror movies are very subjective just by nature, and I think that subjectivity comes into play even more when you start talking about sequels and franchises. The original film in a series is often considered untouchable, which makes sense at least to a degree. I mean, they are the inception of an idea and a story that's often bastardized as the series goes on. But with that being said, it doesn't mean that the original is inherently better. In fact, there are quite a few horror sequels that surpass the original in my opinion, and that, my friends, is why we're here today. I want to highlight some of those films and just talk about them a little bit. Again, horror is very subjective, so I don't expect everyone to agree with me. Honestly, I don't want everyone to agree with me. I love hearing different opinions, so go ahead and let me know down in the comments what horror sequels you enjoy more than the original. A couple ground rules now. I'm considering all sequels, not just part 2s. Also, just because I include a particular film on this list doesn't mean there aren't other films in that franchise or series that could make it as well. Before we fully jump into this show though, be sure to body slam that subscribe button as hard as you can so you never miss any of the hard-hitting, chill-inducing 5-star matches we have here at WWH. Remember, we're not just wrestling with horror, we're delivering it to your screen every week. It is bell time now, so grab your popcorn and make your way to your seat. Let's head down to the ring. Starting us off at number 5 is Child's Play 2. The original Child's Play is a bona fide classic. I'm not denying that at all. I love the introduction of Chucky and Andy Barclay that we got back in 1988, but I like the sequel just a little bit more. I don't know if that's controversial or not, but it's just how I feel. I have more fond memories when it comes to Child's Play 2 than I do with the first one. Actually, I'll tell you a little story. So when I was a kid, my mom worked at Blockbuster, which to me, a kid obsessed with horror movies, was the greatest thing ever. Anyway, she used to bring me to work with her sometimes, and I would get movies off the shelf. Then, with my stack of movies, I'd go into the back room and watch them all day. I remember a few specific things I watched back then, and Child's Play 2 was one of those movies. Specifically, I remember the scene where Chucky kills the foster father with the electric knife. That's what sticks out to me. And of course, you have Kyle, played by Christine Elise. And Kyle is one of my favorite characters in the entire franchise. That relationship that she builds with Andy is so good. At the start, she sees him as this annoying new foster brother, but that changes. By the end, she loves Andy and does everything in her power to protect him from Chucky. And speaking of the end of this film, oh my god, the third act of this movie is phenomenal in a way that only AJ Styles can understand. It's, in my opinion, the best third act of the franchise, and it's not even close. The Good Guy Factory makes for the perfect setting. I just love it so much. Look, Child's Play 2 is not a perfect movie, but there is a lot of fun to be had. It takes the ideas of the first movie and builds upon them in a way that's really interesting and worthy of a sequel. That is why this movie earned its place on this list, and that is why I think Child's Play 2 is better than the original Child's Play. But let me know what you think. Coming in at number 4, we have Final Destination 2. The main reason I think this movie is better than the original is very simple, actually. It's the opening scene. That premonition is absolutely fantastic. Now, let's break it down a little bit more. The opening scene of Final Destination 2 is the one with the pile-up on the interstate. More specifically, the one with the log truck. This one scene traumatized an entire generation. It's the reason people, including myself, still get wary when we see a log truck on the road. We all immediately think of this scene and this movie. Now, I do understand that if you're not super into horror, it can be hard to remember which scenes go with which movie in this franchise. But here at WWH, we're horror fans, so we'll be operating under the context that we know what happens in Final Destination 2 and the other films as well. More importantly, though, the first film. The first Final Destination was a groundbreaking movie that helped usher in this new type of horror film. I'm not downplaying that at all, and I actually love that movie as well. But Final Destination 2, it takes that premise and ups the ante. It raises the stakes and comes up with a new way of defeating death. It's this unique, but still kinda playing by the same rules approach that intrigues me and has me going back to this film more than the original. And if we're talking about the death scenes, I find them more brutal and just cooler overall. The setups are complex and keep you guessing. I mean, you have the fire escape, the pane of glass, the elevator, the barbed wire fence. All of these deaths are done so well and I love them. Maybe it's nostalgia, but I stand by my belief that Final Destination 2 is better than the original. And I'm honestly not really sure how controversial that'll be. Next up at number 3, we have Evil Dead 2. Now this one I think will be controversial, but not because people as a whole don't like this movie, but because people just love this whole franchise. There are a great number of people who believe The Evil Dead is the best in the franchise. There are a great number of people who believe Evil Dead 2 is the best. And there are a great number of people who believe Army of Darkness is the best. Hell, you can even find quite a few people who think the 2013 version of Evil Dead is the best. I don't think there's a wrong answer there, to be honest. Evil Dead is one of the most consistent franchises out there, so it makes sense that you'll have diehards for each of the films. But for me, Evil Dead 2 is the best in the franchise and just slightly outdoes the original. Now, why do I believe that? Well, what it comes down to the most is the combination of horror and physical comedy. The first film is almost all horror. The third one is almost all comedy. The second one, though, is to me a perfect mix of the two. It's still absolutely terrifying, but Ash and his one-liners add so much levity to it that you can't help but laugh sometimes. I also enjoy that the movie retcons some of the first one just a little bit and focuses more on Ash than just the entire group. It retells the story of that first one in a condensed manner before moving on, which admittedly is a little odd, but hey, I'm here for it. There's also the impeccable physically comedic acting from Bruce Campbell. My God, he does a fantastic job. It's so good, and his performance plays a huge role in why I love this movie so much. So yeah, in my opinion, Evil Dead 2 is better than the original, but let me know what you think. Do you think it's better? Our number 2 entrant is A Nightmare on Elm Street 3, Dream Warriors. I've said it before, and I'm sure I'll say it again. I'm not a huge fan of this franchise as a whole. I like the first 3 movies, and I like New Nightmare, but the other ones, I just don't care for. Freddy has just never really done it for me, though I could admit that the idea of his character is really horrifying. I mean, you have this dream demon who attacks you when you're at the most vulnerable state, when you're asleep. Yeah, that's really scary, and I think the first film did a great job portraying that, but I also enjoy the quippy side of Freddy mixed with that scary side. The first couple movies were too straightforward for my liking, and the latter films went too far with the comedy. Dream Warriors is when they got that mix absolutely perfect. It was terrifying, but funny. It's sort of the same reason I prefer Evil Dead 2. Dream Warriors also has some of the most iconic scenes of the franchise. There's, the marionette kill. There's welcome to prime time, bitch. I mean, these moments are a part of horror and pop culture iconography for all of time now. And I love that. I mean, how could I not? How could anyone not? And that's not me saying that you're wrong if you disagree with me. That's just my way of expressing how I feel about this movie. You also get the return of Nancy Thompson teaming up with the Dream Warriors to defeat Freddy. She even sacrifices herself. I think it's such a great end for her character, and that's why I like this one better than the original. Our final entrant today is Friday the 13th Part 4, the final chapter. I know for a fact I'm not alone when I say the original Friday the 13th is not a great movie. I mean, Sean S. Cunningham himself admitted he was trying to rip off Halloween, and while a lot of films did this, none of them had the success that this one did. But I find the original to be poorly directed and honestly kind of boring. I mean, even the reveal of Mrs. Voorhees as the killer was kind of like, what the hell? We never saw this character for even a second until she shows up in the third act, and we're supposed to be surprised that she's the killer? No, I'm not buying it. The best part of this movie, in my opinion, is Kevin Bacon. His death scene is one for the ages without a doubt. Of course, that comes down mainly to the masterful work of Tom Savini, who did the effects for this movie. The sequel did improve greatly in a number of ways. Really though, the first 4 movies of this franchise all told a very similar story. I just think the final chapter did it the best. You got Crispin Glover, Corey Feldman, and Ted White as Jason. In my opinion, he's actually the best Jason. I love what he does with the character. You also had Tom Savini returning to do the special effects. This was truly the perfect combination of people at the perfect time to create what I think is the best version of this story. I know people all have their own opinion on which is the best of this franchise, but to me, the final chapter is the one that I chose to round out this list. But there you have it. Those are 5 horror movie sequels that are better than the original. What did you think about my list? Did I leave any off that you feel should be here? Let me know down in the comments, and go ahead and let me know your full list too. I appreciate you joining me here today, and the support, it truly means a lot to me. If you're interested in Redcon One products, I have a discount code that you can use to save 20% off of your entire order. They have a lot of really great products, so be sure to check that out. You can also find all of my merchandise available at prowrestlingtees.com/AndrewDreamer or right under this video. Also head over to WWH's Patreon page and consider joining us over there, or if you would rather, you can become a member right here on YouTube. All of the links are in the description below. Don't forget to like this video, share the video, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss any of the action here at WWH. Now that we've talked about some great horror sequels, what are the worst sequels of all time? Luckily, you can find out by watching the video that's appearing on your screen now. And remember, in the squared circle of horror, there are no countouts for nightmares. My name is Andrew Dreamer, and this is Wrestling with Horror.